I had Denmark as my dark horses for the tournament, so I think we can all agree, just do the reverse of whatever my predictions are and you'll make some money if you fancy a bet. No, I mean, look, I think Australia, as everybody said already, really clearly exceeded expectations. I mean, 4 years ago, they were in a group with France and Denmark and got 1 point. And I think most people who watch Australia on a regular basis would have thought a similar fate awaited them here. So the fact, I mean, I was actually watching the second half of that Australia-Denmark game, and to be fair, they sort of almost out-Denmarked Denmark, really. They were very difficult to play against. They were very compact. They didn't concede much in terms of chances. And then the goal they scored I thought was just a fantastic counter-attack, really at high pace, brilliant finish. And really, they just sort of stayed in the game long enough and then got the chance when it came. I just didn't see Denmark being this toothless in attack in particular. They scored 1 goal. Christian Eriksen scored their only goal of the tournament. And having obviously got so far, England were a little fortunate to beat them in the semi-finals of the Euros last year. And having got so far just 18 months ago, I really expected them to go much further this time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's not the case. Let's focus and let's wrap up this group very quickly, Rob, on France. Obviously, they rotated their squad against Tunisia. Tunisia got that victory. We mentioned how historically important it was for them, but France are through. Did anything from that match, Rob, make you worry about France, or are you sticking the same?
Yeah, no, not worried at all, really. I mean, you can make a case, at this stage of the tournament, if you're already through, do you pick your best team and try and maintain that momentum into the knockout rounds, or do you rest players for the games ahead? I think in this situation, it's completely understandable that Didier Deschamps would want to rest players, key players who he's going to need later on in the tournament. It's also important, when you're in a squad dynamic, especially when you're away from home in Qatar at a training base, that everyone feels part of the squad and that you use players who perhaps didn't play in the first couple of games just to keep everyone on side, really, keep the spirit up, keep the group motivated. So no real complaints about Didier Deschamps' team selection. Obviously, footballers at this level never want to lose games, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. I think it's far more important that players are kept fresh for the last 16 and quarterfinals and beyond.
Yeah, there's a couple of other factors there, I think. Not least, it's an expanded 26-man squad for this tournament, and you've got more players to keep happy. In years gone by, France are not one of those countries that have had issues at tournaments, inter-squad issues, and players who are bored or are not playing, who get affected and they start speaking out, and then somebody doesn't like what they've said, and then all of a sudden you've got an issue within the camp. If players are getting game time, if they're on the pitch getting minutes, even if it's sort of on a rotational basis like this, then you sort of assuage those concerns. And also, I think it's worth remembering that France made 6 changes for their last group game at the last World Cup, and that worked out all right for them, didn't it? So, I wouldn't read too much into it in terms of momentum. I think it's just Deschamps' methodology, and we looked at. So I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about England later. They obviously made some changes as well. A lot of the sides that have qualified are going to try and freshen the teams up. I think, just as I say, on the one hand, to keep the squads involved and everyone sort of on side and together. But also, there's a day less between these group stage matches, so it just encourages it more to keep people fresh for the later rounds.
Yeah, the World Cup is all about objectives, and getting out of the group is the number one objective. Let's before we move on to England, as James alluded to, James, back to you, and then Rob, you concluded, but very quickly. All right, just give me what do you envisage for your predictions in the knockout stages for these 2 teams, Australia and France, if it's changed at all. Obviously, Australia, very fresh. But what do you envisage as they head into the knockout stages, James?
Well, it's a tricky one in that we obviously don't know which team they're going to play yet, either of them, because they're going to play the winners and the runners-up of the games from tonight's group. So, look, I mean, France, you would expect France to beat whoever they play in the last 16. I mean, if somehow they get Argentina, then that is a tremendous tie. But I just think... Australia really can play with a sense of freedom now. They've exceeded all expectations. This should be treated as a free hit for them, and that will make them dangerous. But yeah, I mean, France have got to be considered among the favourites. As I say, they potentially play England in the quarter-final. They've got a difficult run from looking at the quarters and the way they're shaping up. But yeah, I mean, you would bet against them going all the way again, really.
No, if I was Australia, I'd be looking at the last 16 and possibly beyond now. And I know that sounds ridiculous given that we've just spoken about how they should be happy to be here and happy to qualify and all that kind of stuff. But when you play in the way that they do, they're so compact and so well organised that teams, the last 16 games anyway, between all these teams are all going to be very tight anyway, because you're talking about the best 16 teams in the world. There isn't going to be much between these teams anyway. We talked a little bit before about how the standard of these teams is getting closer to each other anyway. If you're Australia and you're hard to break down and hard to beat in these tight games anyway, funny things happen when games get to extra time and possibly penalty shootouts at this stage of a World Cup. Funny things happen, and teams do make little runs, and I wouldn't be massively surprised from this point if Australia do go a step further.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.